The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched out like a cathedral made of light and stone. Thousands of seats rose in circles toward a domed ceiling that showed the stars themselves, projected from sensors scattered across the galaxy. Representatives from 47 species filled those seats, their bodies as different as the worlds they came from. Some had scales that shimmered like oil on water. Others had wings folded against their backs or tentacles that moved with nervous energy. A few existed only as clouds of glowing particles, held together by magnetic fields. At the center of this gathering stood a single human woman. Ambassador had served humanity for 30 years. She had negotiated treaties, ended wars, and built friendships with species that had been killing each other for centuries before humans ever left Earth. Her hair had turned gray in service to the Council, and lines had formed around her eyes from too many sleepless nights spent reading reports and drafting proposals. She had given everything to this institution, believing with all her heart that cooperation between species was the highest goal any civilization could achieve. Now she stood in silence as that institution prepared to destroy everything she loved. High Arbiter towered above her on a raised platform. He was a species that had dominated galactic politics for 10,000 years. His exoskeleton was the color of dried blood, and his compound eyes reflected its image 1,000 times over. When he spoke, his mandibles clicked together in a way that the translation devices rendered as cold, precise words. "The Council has reached a decision regarding the human question," announced. His voice echoed through the chamber, silencing the whispered conversations that had filled the air moments before. "After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony, we have determined that humanity poses a unique threat to galactic stability." Kept her face neutral, but her hands tightened into fists at her sides. "Humans breed at rates far exceeding any other Council species," continued. "Your population has tripled since joining the Council 3 centuries ago. Your technological advancement outpaces our most optimistic projections. Your military capabilities, while currently limited, show potential for growth that our strategic analysts find deeply concerning." He paused, letting his words sink into the assembled delegates. Many of them nodded in agreement. Others simply watched with expressions that ranged from sympathy to barely concealed satisfaction. "Therefore, the Council has approved the integration mandate by unanimous vote." Felt the blood drain from her face. She had heard rumors of this proposal, but she had refused to believe the Council would actually approve it. The integration mandate was not a treaty or a set of regulations. It was a death sentence for human civilization. "Under the terms of the mandate," said, "all human military vessels will be surrendered to Council control within 60 standard days. Human governments will be dissolved and replaced with appointed administrators selected by this Council. Human colonies will be redistributed among member species to ensure proper oversight." The chamber remained silent, could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. "Additionally," continued, and something in his tone made stomach turn, "human children under the age of maturity will be redistributed among Council species for cultural integration. This will ensure that future generations of humans develop proper respect for galactic institutions and do not inherit the dangerous independence that has characterized your species." Stared at the High Arbiter. She had expected many things when she walked into this chamber today. She had prepared arguments about trade agreements and territorial disputes and military cooperation. She had not prepared for this. They wanted to take human children from their families. They wanted to scatter them across the galaxy, raised by aliens, taught to see their own species as dangerous and wrong. They wanted to break humanity not through war, but through the slow extinction of everything that made humans who they were. "This decision is final," said. "The human delegation may make a statement for the record, but no appeals will be considered. The Council has spoken." For a long moment said nothing. She looked around the chamber at the species she had spent her life serving. the whose sick she had helped heal, the whose civil war she had helped end, the whose art she had championed in cultural exchanges. She had believed these were her friends. She had believed they saw humanity as equals. She had been wrong. Slowly, deliberately, reached up and removed the translation device from her ear. She set it on the podium in front of her. When she spoke in English, knowing that most of the chamber would not understand her words until their own devices caught up. 300 years ago, humanity joined this council, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the sudden silence. We were young. We were eager. We wanted to learn from species that had traveled the stars while we were still learning to make fire. She looked at, meeting his compound eyes without flinching. We gave you everything we had. Our doctors traveled to your worlds and healed diseases you had suffered from. Our soldiers fought and died in wars that had nothing to do with us because you asked for our help. Our artists created works that enriched your cultures. Our scientists shared discoveries freely while yours hoarded knowledge behind patents and restrictions. Her voice grew harder. We did all of this because we believed in the council. We believed that cooperation was better than conflict. We believed that different species could work together as equals. She shook her head slowly. We were fools. The translation devices had caught up now. Murmurs spread through the chamber as delegates realized what the human ambassador was saying. You look at us and see a threat, continued. You see a species that grows too fast and thinks too differently and refuses to know its place. You see children who need to be controlled by their elders. She picked up the translation device and held it in her hand, looking at it as if seeing it for the first time. But we are not your children. We are not your subjects. We are a free people and we will remain free. She dropped the device on the floor. The sound of it hitting the stone echoed through the chamber. Humanity accepts your terms, she said. Leaned forward, his mandibles clicking with what might have been satisfaction. We accept that peace between our species is no longer possible. The satisfaction vanished from his posture. We withdraw from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. We withdraw from all treaties, all agreements, all obligations. Every human in council space will return home. Every human vessel will leave your territory. Every human hand that has helped you will be pulled back. She turned and began walking toward the chamber doors. You have made your choice, she said without looking back. Now live with the consequences. The doors opened before her. She walked through them without hesitation, leaving 47 species staring after her in stunned silence. Within 6 hours, every human embassy in the galaxy had been evacuated. Within 12 hours, human traders had abandoned their shops and their contracts. Within 24 hours, human peacekeepers had withdrawn from 14 active conflict zones. Within a week, humanity had vanished from galactic society as completely as if they had never existed. And in the council chamber, High Arbiter assured his fellow delegates that the humans would return soon enough, begging for forgiveness. He could not have been more wrong. 3 months had passed since the humans left, and the galaxy was beginning to understand what it had lost. High Arbiter stood before his personal viewing screen, watching reports scroll past with growing unease. He had expected anger from the humans. He had expected threats and desperate negotiations. He had prepared responses for every possible human reaction, from military posturing to economic sanctions. He had not prepared for silence. The border between council space and human territory stretched across thousands of light years. Before the withdrawal, it had been the busiest region in the galaxy. Human freighters carried goods in both directions. Human communication relays kept species connected across impossible distances. Human border stations welcomed travelers and processed paperwork with efficiency that other species had never managed to match. Now there was nothing. The freighters had stopped. The communication relays had been shut down. The border station stood empty, their lights dark, their docking bays sealed. Ships that approached the human side of the border found nothing but automated warning buoys broadcasting a simple message in every known language: turn back. Had sent scouts to investigate, of course. The first few had simply been turned away by the warning buoys. When he sent military vessels with orders to push past the warnings, they found something worse than weapons waiting for them. They found empty space. The human colonies closest to the border had been abandoned. Cities that had housed millions of people stood silent and dark. Factories that had produced goods for half the galaxy had been stripped of equipment. Farms that had fed entire sectors had been left to return to wilderness. The humans had not destroyed anything. They had simply taken everything of value and left. Where did they go? Demanded of his advisors. None of them had answers. The situation was becoming desperate. They were an ancient species, their civilization stretching back nearly 100,000 years. They had mastered genetic engineering before humans had learned to speak. They had built space stations the size of moons and terraformed worlds to match their precise specifications. But they had never developed proper pharmaceutical manufacturing. For the past 2 centuries, they had imported human medicines. Human doctors had developed treatments for diseases that scientists had struggled with for. Human factories had produced these medicines cheaply and efficiently, shipping them across the galaxy in quantities that ensured every world had access. Now the shipments had stopped. Avda stood before her own council, trying to explain a crisis that should have been impossible. They had stockpiles, she assured them. They had reserves that would last months, perhaps even a year if they rationed carefully. But the diseases would not wait. A respiratory infection that human medicine had reduced to a minor inconvenience was spreading through the northern continent. Without treatment, it would kill perhaps 3% of those infected. That did not sound like much until you calculated 3% of 8 billion people. Contact the humans, her council demanded. Apologize, offer them whatever they want. Had tried. Every message she sent toward human space bounced back unanswered. Every diplomatic channel had been closed. The humans were not negotiating because there was nothing to negotiate. They had made their position clear when they left. They were done with the council. The problem was different but equally troubling. They were a warrior species, proud and aggressive, their society built around combat and conquest. For centuries, they had channeled their aggression into carefully managed competitions and ritualized warfare. But they had also developed a taste for human entertainment. Human stories, human music, human games had spread through society like wildfire. Young grew up watching human adventure films and playing human video games. Human sports had become more popular than traditional combat rituals. Human fashion had influenced clothing. Human slang had crept into the language. Now all of that was gone. The entertainment networks that had broadcast human content went dark. The streaming services that had delivered human games crashed when their servers, hosted on human worlds, became unreachable. The merchandise that children had collected became priceless artifacts overnight as no new shipments arrived. The population grew restless. Young who had grown up on human entertainment found traditional culture boring and violent. Without the outlet that human media had provided, old tensions began to resurface. Border skirmishes that had been dormant for decades flared up again. The Council had hoped that cutting humanity off would make the galaxy safer. Instead, it was making everything worse. On Earth, President Daniel Hayes stood before the cameras and addressed humanity for the first time since the withdrawal. Behind him, the skyline of New Geneva stretched toward the clouds, but something had changed. Construction drones filled the air, more than anyone had ever seen before. Massive structures were rising on the outskirts of the city, their purpose unclear but their scale breathtaking. "My fellow humans," Daniel said, his voice calm and steady. 3 months ago, the Galactic Council informed us that we were too dangerous to be free. They demanded our ships, our governments, and our children. They wanted to break us apart and scatter us among species that see us as threats to be managed rather than partners to be respected. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. We refused. The construction drones continued their work behind him, moving in patterns too complex for the cameras to follow. For 300 years, we gave the Council everything we had. We believed in their vision of a united galaxy. We sacrificed our sons and daughters in their wars. We shared our knowledge and our culture freely. And when we asked for nothing but the right to remain free, they told us we were too dangerous to be trusted. His expression hardened. They were right. The words hung in the air. Not because we are warlike, not because we are aggressive, not because we want to conquer or destroy. They were right because we are dangerous to anyone who tries to take our freedom. We are dangerous to anyone who threatens our children. We are dangerous to anyone who mistakes our kindness for weakness. He gestured to the construction behind him. For 3 months we have been silent. We have not threatened. We have not begged. We have simply worked. Every human world has been focused on a single goal, ensuring that we will never again be vulnerable to the whims of species who see us as lesser beings. He looked directly into the camera. The Council believes we will come crawling back. They believe we cannot survive without them. They are about to learn how wrong they are. The broadcast ended. Across human space, billions of people returned to their work. Scientists labored in laboratories. Engineers built machines that should have been impossible. Soldiers trained for wars they hoped would never come. And in the Council chamber, High Arbiter watched the human broadcast with growing concern. He had been so certain that humanity would break. He had been so confident that a few months of isolation would bring them to their knees. Instead, they seemed stronger than ever. He pushed the concern aside. Humanity was young. They had been spacefaring for barely 5 centuries. Whatever they were building, it could not possibly match the combined might of 47 species with thousands of years of technological development. He would be patient. He would wait. And when the humans finally came begging, he would make them pay for every moment of defiance. It was the biggest mistake of his long life. 1 year had passed since humanity vanished from galactic society, and High Arbiter had finally lost patience. The Council chamber was filled with tension as he announced his decision. The Liberation Fleet would cross into human space and bring the rebellious species back under control. 40,000 warships from 12 different species would participate, representing the largest military force assembled in galactic history. The humans have had time to reconsider, declared, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. They have chosen isolation over cooperation. Now they will learn that no species can stand alone against the united will of the Council. Of the Rose to object. Her people had suffered greatly over the past year. The plague had spread despite their best efforts, and millions had died from diseases that human medicine could have cured. She had no love for the Council's decision, but she feared what would happen if they pushed humanity further. High Arbiter, she said carefully, perhaps we should attempt negotiation before military action. The humans have not attacked us. They have simply withdrawn. Turned his compound eyes toward her with obvious contempt. They have grown weak from depending on human charity. Perhaps that is why you counsel weakness now. Fell silent, knowing that further argument was useless. The Liberation Fleet departed 3 days later, jumping through hyperspace toward the human border. Admiral of the commanded the armada from his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. He was a veteran of a dozen wars, and he had never known defeat. The thought of facing a species barely 5 centuries old amused him. They will surrender when they see our numbers, he told his officers. And if they do not surrender, we will crush them and take what we came for. The fleet crossed the border without resistance. The The warning buoys that had turned back previous expeditions fell silent as the armada approached, as if the humans had finally accepted the inevitable. Felt a surge of satisfaction. The younger species had come to their senses. But as the fleet pushed deeper into human space, that satisfaction began to fade. The first colony they reached was empty, not destroyed, not defended, simply empty. The building stood intact. The power system still functioned, but there was no one there. No humans, no animals, not even plants in the parks and gardens. Everything biological had been removed. The second colony was the same, and the third, and the 10th. "Where are they?" demanded of his scanning officers. They had no answers. Human space had been home to nearly 50 billion people before the withdrawal. Those people had to be somewhere. They could not simply have vanished. But it seemed they had. The fleet pressed on toward the Sol system, the heart of human civilization. Earth itself awaited them, the birthplace of humanity, the world that had sent its children to the stars. Whatever was happening, the answers would be there. They arrived at the edge of the Sol system and found nothing. Stared at his displays in disbelief. He checked the coordinates 3 times. He had his navigation officers verify their position against every known reference point. There was no mistake. Earth was gone. Not destroyed. There was no debris field, no radiation signature, no evidence of any weapon. The planet had simply been removed from its orbit as if it had never existed. The moon that had circled Earth for billions of years was also missing. Mars showed signs of recent activity but was equally deserted. "That is impossible," whispered. His science officers scrambled to explain what they were seeing. Planets did not simply disappear. The gravitational effects alone should have been catastrophic. The other planets in the system should have been thrown into chaos by the sudden removal of Earth's mass. But the system was stable. Whatever the humans had done, they had done it perfectly. "Admiral," one of his officers said, his voice shaking, "we are detecting a signal." A small satellite orbited the empty space where Earth had once been. It was broadcasting on all frequencies, repeating a single message over and over. Ordered it displayed on his screen. A human woman appeared. She wore a military uniform and spoke with a calm that bordered on boredom, as if addressing a fleet of 40,000 warships was the least interesting part of her day. "I am Captain Laura of the United Human Navy," she said. "You are trespassing in sovereign human space. We have no interest in your fleet, your council, or your ultimatums." She paused, and something that might have been amusement flickered across her face. "As you have noticed, we have relocated We have also relocated our colonies, our people, and everything we care about. You will not find us. You will not catch us. We have moved beyond your reach." Felt cold despite the regulated temperature of his command deck. "Do not attempt to search for us. Do not attempt to contact us. We will not respond. Your presence here accomplishes nothing except to waste your fuel and our time." The woman leaned slightly toward the camera. "Go home, Admiral. Tell your High Arbiter that humanity sends its regards. Tell him that we have not forgotten what the Council tried to do. Tell him that we are watching." The message ended. A moment later, the satellite exploded in a flash of light, leaving nothing behind. Admiral stood in silence for a long moment. Around him, his officers waited for orders. Behind him, 40,000 warships waited for direction. They had come to conquer a species and found empty space. "Admiral," his second-in-command asked, "what are your orders?" Thought about pushing forward. He thought about searching the galaxy until he found where the humans had hidden. He thought about proving that the could not be. Then he thought about what he had just witnessed. The humans had moved a planet, not destroyed it, not abandoned it, but moved it. They had picked up their entire world and carried it somewhere else, somewhere no one could find them. They had done this in less than a year. His species had spent 10,000 years developing faster-than-light travel. They had considered it the greatest achievement in their history, and the humans had casually demonstrated technology that made hyperspace look like a child's toy. "We return home," said quietly. "Sorry." "We return home," he repeated louder. "There is nothing for us here." The Liberation fleet turned and began the long journey back to Council space. Behind them, the Sol system sat empty and silent, keeping its secrets. When delivered his report to the Council, the chamber fell into chaos. Delegates shouted at each other, demanding explanations that no one could provide. High Arbiter tried to maintain order but found his authority crumbling as species that had supported the integration mandate began to question whether they had made a terrible mistake. "They moved a planet," said into the chaos. "They moved a planet in less than a year. What else can they do? What will they do next?" No one had answers. On a world that could not be found on any map, in a star system that did not appear in any database, humanity watched the Council's panic with grim satisfaction. They had not wanted this. They had wanted peace and cooperation, and a place among the galactic community. The Council had taken that option away. Now humanity would chart its own course, and the galaxy would learn to live with the consequences. 5 years had passed since humanity from the galaxy, and the Galactic Council was dying. High Arbiter stood before the same chamber where he had announced the integration mandate, but everything had changed. Half the seats were empty now, their occupants either dead or refusing to attend. The species that remained looked at him with hatred barely concealed behind diplomatic masks. The great alliance he had inherited was crumbling, and everyone knew who to blame. The wars had started within months of the Liberation fleet's humiliating return. Old conflicts that human peacekeepers had held in check for decades exploded back to life. The Enda went to war over mining rights in a disputed sector, a fight that human negotiators had prevented 17 times before. Without humans to mediate, the dispute became a massacre. They were winning, of course. They were born for combat, their entire society built around the glory of battle, but victory was costing them more than they had expected. Their economy, already weakened by the loss of human trade goods, was collapsing under the strain of prolonged warfare. Their young people, raised on human entertainment that celebrated cooperation over conquest, were refusing to fight in numbers that shocked their elders. They were losing soldiers and civilians by the millions, but worse than the military losses was the plague. The respiratory infection that human medicine had controlled so easily had mutated 3 times in 5 years. Each mutation made it deadlier and harder to treat. Scientists worked frantically to develop their own cure, but they had relied on human pharmaceutical knowledge for so long that they had forgotten how to innovate. Had aged 20 years in 5. Her scales had lost their luster, and her movements carried the weight of constant grief. She had watched her people die by the hundreds of millions, while the Council debated and delayed and accomplished nothing. "This is your fault," she told during one particularly heated session. "You drove away the only species that actually helped us. You threatened their children and expected them to submit. Now look at what your arrogance has cost us." Had no defense. He could only cling to his position and hope that something would change. Other crises across Council space. The communication networks that humans had maintained began failing, isolating worlds that had depended on instant contact with the rest of the galaxy. Trade routes collapsed as the neutral human merchants who had carried goods between hostile species disappeared. Scientific collaboration ground to a halt as research institutions that had shared data through human-run exchanges found themselves cut off from their partners. And then there were the rumors spread through the frontier like wildfire. Traders spoke of human ships appearing out of nowhere, observing quietly, then vanishing before anyone could respond. A patrol reported detecting energy signatures unlike anything in their databases, signatures that appeared and disappeared in the space between heartbeats. A warship pursuing a damaged vessel found itself suddenly surrounded by ships that matched no known design, then found itself alone again with no explanation. The humans were watching. Everyone knew it. No one knew what they were waiting for. On a hidden world far from Council space, Admiral Price reviewed the latest intelligence reports with his senior staff. The conference room was simple and functional, its walls displaying real-time data from across the galaxy. Through the window behind him, the relocated Earth hung in an alien sky, surrounded by moons that had been moved along with it. "The Council is fracturing faster than we expected," said Dr. Cole, head of the Advanced Research Division. She was older now, her hair showing streaks of gray, but her mind remained as sharp as ever. "The plague has killed over 2 billion people. The war has killed another 500 million. At this rate, they will tear themselves apart within a decade." General Grant, commander of the Home Defense Force, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was a soldier, trained to protect humanity from external threats. Watching other species destroy themselves did not sit well with him. "Should we intervene?" he asked. "We have the medicine they need. We could end their plague tomorrow if we chose." Considered the question carefully. 5 years ago, the answer would have been obvious. Humanity had always helped those in need. It was part of who they were. But 5 years ago, the Council had tried to steal their children. "Not yet," he said finally. "They need to understand what they lost. They need to feel the consequences of their choices." Nodded in agreement, but looked troubled. "How long do we wait?" the general asked. "How many more have to die before we decide they have learned their lesson?" Turned to look out the window at the Earth hanging in the sky. His daughter was down there, living in a city that had been rebuilt on a world no enemy could find. His played in parks under an alien sun, safe because humanity had chosen to protect itself rather than submit. "I do not know," he admitted. "But I know this, we cannot go back to the way things were. If we help them now, they will see it as weakness. They will think we need them. We have to wait until they understand that we are helping them because we choose to, not because we must." The meeting continued, but could not shake his unease. He had joined the military to protect people. Watching billions die from a preventable disease felt like a betrayal of everything he believed in. That night he stood alone on an observation deck, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, children were dying from a plague that human medicine could cure. Somewhere out there, soldiers were killing each other in wars that human diplomats could end. The Council had tried to enslave humanity, and humanity had responded by abandoning the galaxy to its fate. He understood the logic. He even agreed with it in a cold and rational way. But he could not help wondering what kind of species they were becoming. The answer came 3 days later, whence message reached human space. She had transmitted it without authorization, risking everything to reach the species her people had helped to betray. Her words were simple and direct, stripped of diplomatic language. "We were wrong. We were afraid of you because you were different, because you grew faster than we expected, because you made us feel small and obsolete. We let that fear drive us to cruelty. Please, help us. Not because we deserve it, but because you are better than we are. You always were." Watched the message in silence. When it ended, he looked at his staff. "No response," he said. Started to object, but held up a hand. "Not yet, but soon." He turned back to the window. "Let them remember this moment. Let them remember how it felt to beg for help from the species they tried to destroy. And when we finally answer, let them remember that we came because we chose to, not because they asked." The stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the suffering below. And somewhere in the darkness between worlds, humanity waited, watching, preparing for a return that would change everything. 20 years had passed since humanity from the galaxy, and no one alive remembered a time before the silence. A generation of aliens had grown up hearing stories about the humans. Parents told their children about the strange, soft-skinned creatures who had once walked among them, healing the sick and building bridges between enemies. Teachers taught lessons about the integration mandate and the great mistake that had driven humanity away. Priests and philosophers debated whether the humans would ever return and what their return might mean. The council still existed, but it was a shadow of what it had once been. Only 23 species remained as members. The others had either collapsed into civil war, been conquered by their neighbors, or simply withdrawn to focus on their own survival. High Arbiter was long dead, his legacy one of failure and shame. His successor, a young named, had risen to power, promising to restore the council to its former glory. He had not succeeded. On this particular morning, was reviewing reports in his private chambers when alarms began screaming throughout the capital. He rushed to the command center, demanding answers from officers who had none to give. A ship had appeared in orbit above the council. It was small, barely larger than a personal shuttle, and it carried no weapons that their sensors could detect. But its design was unlike anything in their databases. Its hull seemed to shimmer and shift, never quite settling into a fixed shape. And it had appeared without warning, without any sign of approaching through normal space, without any trace of the hyperspace signatures that accompanied every other vessel in the galaxy. "Identify yourselves," commanded over all frequencies. "You are in restricted space. Respond immediately or face destruction." The ship did not respond. Instead, it began descending toward the planet's surface, ignoring the planetary shields as if they did not exist. Defense batteries opened fire, but their weapons passed through the vessel without effect. Fighter squadrons scrambled to intercept, but they could not match its speed or predict its movements. The ship landed in the central plaza of the capital city, settling gently onto the ancient stones where the council had held public ceremonies for thousands of years. Crowds that had gathered to witness the commotion fell back in fear and confusion. The ship's hatch opened, and a single human stepped out. She was a woman of middle years, though something about her appearance seemed strange. Her skin was smooth and unlined, her movements graceful and controlled. She wore a simple gray uniform with no insignia, and she carried nothing but a small crystal in her hand. Guards rushed toward her, weapons raised. She ignored them completely, walking through their formation as if they were not there. When one guard attempted to physically block her path, he found himself gently moved aside by a force he could not see or understand. The woman walked through the streets of the capital, heading directly toward the council chamber. Citizens stared at her from windows and doorways, many of them seeing a human for the first time in their lives. She did not acknowledge them. Her attention was fixed on her destination. The doors of the council chamber opened as she approached, though no one had commanded them to do so. She walked inside, and the delegates who had gathered to respond to the emergency fell silent. Stood at the High Arbiter's podium, surrounded by advisors and guards. He watched the human woman approach with a mixture of fear and fascination. 20 years of wondering what humanity had become, and now the answer was walking toward him. "I am Emma Hayes," the woman said. Her voice was calm and clear, carrying easily through the vast chamber without any apparent amplification. "I am the daughter of Daniel Hayes, who led humanity during the withdrawal. I have come to deliver a message." Found his voice. "You have no authority to be here. This chamber is reserved for council members and their representatives. Humanity abandoned its seat 20 years ago." Emma smiled slightly, and there was something sad in the expression. "We did not abandon anything. You tried to take our children, you tried to destroy us. We simply chose to survive." She looked around the chamber at the assembled delegates. Many of them were species she had never seen, born after the withdrawal. Others were older, carrying memories of the galaxy that had existed before. 20 years ago you tried to enslave us," she said. "You failed. In the time since, we have advanced beyond anything you can imagine. We can move stars. We can bend the fabric of space. We can exist in dimensions your science says are impossible." She held up the crystal in her hand. We have watched your wars. We have watched your plagues. We have watched you tear yourselves apart over conflicts that human diplomats could have resolved in an afternoon. Her voice hardened. We could destroy you. Every planet, every ship, every trace of your civilizations gone in an instant. We have that power. We have had that power for 15 years. The chamber was absolutely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. But we choose not to. Emma walked forward and placed the crystal on the podium in front of. This contains the cure for the plague, which has now spread to 17 other species. It contains medical advances that will double the of every species represented in this chamber. It contains technology that will end the wars you have been fighting since we left. She stepped back. We are giving you this freely, without conditions, not because you deserve it, not because you asked for it, because we remember what we used to believe about cooperation between species, because we still believe that the galaxy can be better than it has been. Stared at her. Why, after everything we did to you, why would you help us? Emma was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Because hatred is exhausting, she said finally. Because revenge is empty. Because our children deserve to grow up in a galaxy that is at peace, even if that peace was not given to them. She turned to address the full chamber. Humanity is not returning to the Council. We will never again be subject to your votes and your mandates. We have built our own civilization, and we will continue to develop it on our own terms. She paused. But we are not your enemies. We never wanted to be your enemies. We only wanted to be left in peace, and when you threatened that peace, we protected ourselves. She began walking toward the door. This is our offer. Take what we have given you. Use it to rebuild. Use it to heal, or throw it away and continue destroying each other. The choice is yours. She stopped at the threshold and looked back. And if you ever threaten us again, if you ever try to take what is ours, we will not be so merciful. We will not leave and hide. We will end you so completely that the galaxy will forget you ever existed. Her expression softened. But I do not think that will happen. I think you have learned. I think, in 20 years of suffering, you have finally understood that humanity is not a threat to be managed but a partner to be respected. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Welcome to the new galaxy. Try not to mess it up. Emma Hayes walked out of the council chamber, boarded her impossible ship, and vanished into the sky. Behind her, the crystal sat on the podium, glowing softly with the promise of salvation. For a long moment, no one moved, then reached out and picked up the crystal. Distribute this to every medical facility in council space, he said quietly. Immediately. No one argued. No one debated. For the first time in 20 years, the council acted with unity and purpose. In the months that followed, the plague was cured. The wars ended. Species that had been killing each other for decades sat down and negotiated peace. The technology in the crystal revolutionized medicine, energy production, and transportation across the galaxy. And somewhere beyond the edge of known space, on a world that could not be found, humanity watched and waited. They had given the galaxy a second chance. They hoped it would be enough. But if it was not, they would be ready. They always would be.